The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered arrogance meeting its absolute destruction. Victoria Ashford, the wife of a Fortune 500 CEO who hadn't worked a single day in her pampered life but somehow managed to spend $40,000 every month on shopping sprees, walked into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing a Cartier love bracelet encrusted with diamonds worth more than most people earn in an entire year. Her smile radiated the kind of confidence that screamed, "I own you, I own this room, and I own everyone in it." She was here for what should have been a simple $3,200 dispute with her former personal assistant, a case that any reasonable person would settle quickly, maybe pay what was owed, and move on with their privileged life. Should take 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, and then she would be back to her country club brunch where she could laugh about this inconvenience with her equally entitled friends over champagne and gossip. But 52-year-old Victoria Ashford made a decision in that courtroom that would cost her $50,000 in judgments and fines, her marriage to the CEO she constantly name-dropped, her entire social standing in the community where she had once reigned like untouchable royalty, and every single ounce of dignity she had left. When Judge Judy questioned her about unpaid wages owed to a struggling single mother, when the judge dared to treat her like she was just another defendant rather than the wife of someone important, Victoria did something so breathtakingly entitled, so shockingly disrespectful that even the bailiff who had seen everything in his 20 years of service had to step forward. She actually snapped her fingers at Judge Judy Scanlon like she was summoning a waiter at a restaurant, like she was calling over a servant who had been too slow bringing her cocktail. The sound of that snap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. And then Victoria Ashford opened her mouth and said 7 words that would turn her into the most hated woman on the internet, 7 words that would be shared 127 million times across every social media platform imaginable. Do you know who my husband is? What happens next isn't just courtroom justice where a plaintiff gets what they're owed and everyone goes home satisfied. This is a masterclass in why money doesn't buy respect, why treating human beings like disposable servants eventually catches up with you, and why one entitled woman's arrogance would trigger the most devastating takedown in Judge Judy history. A takedown so brutal, so methodical, so absolutely comprehensive that it would cost Victoria her marriage when her husband filed for divorce the moment he saw the episode, her reputation when she became known nationwide as the most entitled CEO wife in America, and exposed dark secrets about how she had been systematically abusing household employees for over a decade. Before we show you the exact moment Victoria's perfectly curated world exploded in spectacular fashion on national television, before we reveal how Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the very first question, you need to smash that like button right now because you're about to witness the most satisfying courtroom destruction in TV history. Hit subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about this CEO wife's pattern of abuse, the criminal investigation it triggers, and the devastating consequences that follow will absolutely shock you to your core. If this story about entitled rich people who think they're above everyone else finally getting what they deserve makes you believe that karma is real and justice still exists, comment "Justice served" below. Trust me when I say the next 20 minutes will restore your faith that no amount of money, no powerful husband, no designer clothes can protect you when you disrespect the wrong judge and cross the line from arrogance into actual criminal behavior. Here's a question that everyone watching needs to consider. When exactly did some people start believing that marrying wealth gives them the right to treat other human beings like disposable servants who exist only to make their lives more comfortable? When did having access to unlimited money convince certain individuals that the rules of basic human decency somehow don't apply to them anymore? Because what happened to Victoria Ashford in Judge Judy's courtroom proves beyond any shadow of doubt that Judge Judy remembers something that entitled people often forget. Behind every luxury lifestyle, behind every $40,000 monthly shopping budget, behind every country club membership and designer wardrobe, there are real people who actually work for a living. Real people with families and dreams and bills to pay. Real people who deserve to be treated with basic respect and dignity regardless of how much money is in their employer's bank account. And when someone forgets that fundamental truth, when someone like Victoria Ashford decides that wealth makes her superior to the people who work for her, Judge Judy is there to deliver a reality check so devastating that it changes lives forever. Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock sharp, Studio 4A in the Judge Judy production facility. The case being called was Maria Santos versus Victoria Ashford, a dispute over $3,200 in unpaid wages, wrongful termination, and emotional distress. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the assembled audience as he announced the parties, and the contrast between the two women entering that courtroom couldn't have been more stark or more symbolic of everything this case represented. Victoria Ashford entered first, and she didn't just walk into the courtroom, she made an entrance like she was arriving at a gala event where photographers should be waiting to capture her importance. Her Chanel suit, perfectly tailored and unmistakably expensive at $8,500, moved with her like a second skin. The Hermès Birkin bag dangling from her arm carried a price tag of $25,000, the kind of accessory that screams wealth so loudly it drowns out everything else. That Cartier bracelet on her wrist, the one encrusted with enough diamonds to blind anyone standing too close, had cost her $45,000, though she would tell anyone who asked that it was just a little gift her husband picked up for her birthday. Her blonde hair was fresh from the salon, highlighted and styled to perfection, not a strand out of place. And then there were the sunglasses, oversized Gucci frames that cost $600, perched on her face indoors like she was some celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi rather than a defendant in a wage theft case. Judge Judy's first words to Victoria were simple and direct, the kind of instruction any reasonable person would follow immediately without question. "Mrs. Ashford, remove your sunglasses. This is a courtroom, not a fashion runway." But Victoria's response told everyone watching exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. She removed the sunglasses with exaggerated slowness, accompanied by an eye roll so dramatic it could have been seen from the back row, and her voice dripped with annoyed condescension when she spoke. "Seriously? I just had Botox injections this morning. The lights in here are incredibly harsh on my face." Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, that moment before a storm when animals sense danger and start seeking shelter. "Put your phone away as well, Mrs. Ashford. You're in my courtroom now, and you'll give these proceedings your full attention." Maria Santos entered the courtroom like she was walking into a place where her fate would be decided, because that's exactly what was happening. She was 34 years old, a Latina immigrant who had come to the United States at age 12 with dreams of building a better life for herself and eventually for the family she would raise. She wore a modest dress purchased from a department store, probably on sale, the kind of outfit that working people wear when they need to look presentable but can't afford designer labels. In her hands she clutched a folder containing text messages, emails, photographs, and evidence that represented 14 months of systematic abuse and exploitation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying in that specific moment, but from months of stress, from working 3 jobs simultaneously since being fired without final payment, from lying awake at night wondering how she would feed her 2 children, ages 7 and 10, while fighting for justice against someone with unlimited resources. Her hands trembled slightly as she held that folder against her chest like a shield, and beside her sat her elderly mother who spoke almost no English but had insisted on being there to support her daughter through this ordeal. The gallery was packed with people who had come for different reasons but would all leave forever changed by what they witnessed. Several former employees of Victoria Ashford sat scattered throughout the audience, women who had worked as housekeepers, nannies, personal assistants, and chefs in the Ashford household over the past decade. They had seen the case listed on the Judge Judy website and had traveled from across the state to be present, to bear witness, to finally see someone hold Victoria accountable for behavior they had all experienced but felt powerless to challenge. A local reporter sat in the third row, notebook ready, having heard rumors about this case and sensing it might be something bigger than a standard small claims dispute. Representatives from a women's advocacy group had come after Maria reached out to them for support in navigating the legal system. And scattered throughout were people who simply recognized Victoria Ashford's name from society pages and charity galas, people from her own social circle who had heard whispers about how she treated her staff but had never seen it confronted directly. Judge Judy reviewed the case file in front of her with the methodical attention of someone who had presided over 20,000 cases and developed an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns of abuse, manipulation, and fraud within the first 30 seconds. "Mrs. Ashford, you're being sued by your former personal assistant for $3,200 in unpaid wages and wrongful termination. How do you respond to these allegations?" Victoria Ashford didn't look up from her phone when Judge Judy asked the question. Her perfectly manicured fingers continued scrolling through whatever she found more important than the legal proceedings happening around her, and when she finally did respond, her voice carried the kind of dismissive irritation someone might use when dealing with a particularly persistent telemarketer. "This whole thing is completely ridiculous, Your Honor. These people always try to squeeze extra money out of you after they've been let go from employment. It's a predictable pattern with this type of employee." The phrase "this type of employee" hung in the air like poison gas, and Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, that first warning sign that experienced viewers of her show recognized as the calm before a devastating storm. "Mrs. Ashford, I asked you a specific question. Did you pay Ms. Santos the wages you owed her for her final month of employment? Answer yes or no." Victoria sighed loudly, the kind of exaggerated exhale that communicated her belief that everyone in the courtroom was wasting her valuable time. "She became unreliable toward the end, Your Honor. Her performance declined significantly. I was withholding final payment until she completed tasks to my satisfaction. That's standard practice in household employment." Judge Judy's voice took on an edge that could cut through steel. "Standard practice? Mrs. Ashford, withholding wages because you're unsatisfied with an employee's performance isn't standard practice. It's called wage theft, and it's illegal in every state in this country." Victoria's response was to laugh, actually laugh out loud in a courtroom where a single mother was fighting for money she desperately needed to feed her children. "Theft? That's incredibly dramatic, Your Honor. I was planning to pay her eventually once she met my standards and completed her duties appropriately." Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair with the focused intensity of a predator who had just spotted weakness in prey. "When exactly were you planning to pay her, Mrs. Ashford? When you felt like it?" Victoria shrugged with the kind of casual indifference that made several people in the gallery audibly gasp. "Well, yes. It's my money, isn't it? I decide when and how it gets distributed to people who work for me." Maria Santos sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, and when Judge Judy turned to her with a gentler tone, asking her to explain what her employment had been like, the story that emerged painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond a simple wage dispute. Maria's voice shook as she spoke, but she forced the words out with the determination of someone who had finally found the courage to speak truth to power. "Your Honor, I worked for Mrs. Ashford for 14 months as her personal assistant. The job was supposed to be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, for $800 per week. That's what the contract said. That's what I agreed to. But within the first month, everything changed. The job became my entire life. She would call me at 2 in the morning demanding I come to her house immediately to pick up her dry cleaning because she had decided she wanted to wear a specific dress the next day. She would text me at 11:30 at night telling me to come over right then because her friends were arriving for brunch the next morning and she needed me to prepare the guest room. I have 2 young daughters, Your Honor. I missed my oldest daughter's school play, the one she had been practicing for all semester, because Mrs. Ashford needed someone to accompany her shopping and she insisted it had to be that specific afternoon. Judge Judy asked Maria to present her evidence, and what followed was a devastating catalogue of abuse that had been meticulously documented over 14 months. Text messages filled the courtroom screen, each one more demanding and unreasonable than the last. 2:47 in the morning, where are you? I need my sleeping pills from the pharmacy right now. 3:15 in the morning, I cannot sleep. Come to the house and make me chamomile tea. Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, church service is at 10. Be here at 7 to help me choose my outfit and do my hair. The messages went on and on, a relentless stream of demands that treated Maria not as an employee with set hours and reasonable boundaries, but as property that Victoria could summon whenever the impulse struck her. Then came the emails, and these were even worse because they revealed not just the unreasonable demands but the contempt and cruelty behind them. One email read, "Your English is absolutely terrible. How did you even manage to get a green card with such poor language skills?" Another stated, "When my friends are visiting, do not speak to them directly. Just serve the refreshments and try to be invisible." You're here to work, not to socialize with your betters. A third email, sent just 2 weeks before Maria was fired, said, "You should consider yourself lucky to work for someone like me. Most people like you spend their lives cleaning toilets in office buildings. I've given you an opportunity to be around successful people and learn how the world really works." The photographs Maria presented next were time-stamped proof of the impossible schedule Victoria had demanded, and they painted a picture of exploitation so severe it bordered on indentured servitude. Images showed Maria arriving at the Ashford mansion at midnight, 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, always exhausted, always responding to another urgent summons that couldn't possibly wait until normal working hours. Screenshots of her work calendar revealed 18-hour days stretching across weeks without a single day off, schedules that would have violated labor laws in any legitimate employment situation. 6 straight months without a weekend, without a holiday, without even a few consecutive hours to spend with her own children who were growing up with a mother too exhausted and too terrified of losing her income to ever say no to another unreasonable demand. Victoria's response to this mountain of evidence was a performance in calculated dismissiveness that made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "That's just how demanding professional positions work, Your Honor. If she couldn't handle the requirements of employment with a high-profile household, she should have sought work elsewhere. Nobody forced her to stay. She could have quit at any time if the job was too difficult for her capabilities." Judge Judy's voice dropped to that dangerously quiet tone that made even the camera operators stop moving. "Mrs. Ashford, you're telling this court that expecting 24-hour availability, demanding someone abandon their children for your shopping trips, and sending messages at 3 in the morning is normal employment practice?" Victoria met her gaze with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for anything in her entire privileged life. "For someone in my position, yes. People who work in high-end household management understand that excellence requires sacrifice. Sometimes that means being available when needed rather than watching the clock like hourly workers at fast food restaurants." Judge Judy gestured to the bailiff, and suddenly 3 women stood up from the gallery and approached the bench. "Mrs. Ashford, I see Ms. Santos brought character witnesses. These women have sworn statements about their own experiences working in your household." The first witness was a Latina woman in her 50s named Carmen Rodriguez who had worked as Victoria's housekeeper for 3 years. "Your Honor, Mrs. Ashford treated all of us like we were animals, not people. She called us the help to our faces, never by our names, just hey you or the help. She made my 16-year-old daughter, who was helping me clean one summer, scrub the floors on her hands and knees while Mrs. Ashford stood over her laughing and saying this is what happens when you don't go to college, this is your future if you don't study hard. My daughter cried for hours that night. She felt humiliated and worthless. And when I asked Mrs. Ashford to please treat my child with some basic respect, she fired me on the spot without paying me my final 2 weeks of wages." The second witness was an African-American woman in her 40s named Patricia Williams who had worked as the Ashford family nanny for 2 years. "I took care of Mrs. Ashford's stepchildren, Your Honor. She would call me at all hours of the day and night, berate me in front of the children for small mistakes, tell those kids right in front of me that this is what happens when you don't apply yourself in school, you end up taking care of other people's children instead of having a real career. She used me as an example of failure to motivate her stepchildren. She once told them, look at Patricia, she's 40 years old and still working as a nanny because she made poor life choices. The cruelty wasn't just directed at me, Your Honor. It was weaponized to teach those children that people like me, people who work service jobs, are somehow less than human. And she owes me $4,800 in unpaid overtime that she promised to pay but never did." The third witness was Kevin Chen, an Asian-American chef in his 30s who had worked in the Ashford household for 6 months before fleeing what he described as the most toxic work environment of his entire culinary career. "Your Honor, she threw food at me. Literally threw a plate of salmon at my head because she said the temperature wasn't exactly 145 degrees as she'd specified. The plate shattered against the wall behind me, and she stood there laughing while I cleaned it up, saying that's what you get for incompetence, maybe next time you'll pay attention to details. She never paid me for my final 3 weeks of work. Just told me to get out of her house and said if I caused any trouble, her husband's lawyers would destroy me in court. I was too scared to fight back because I'm trying to get my citizenship, and I thought someone that powerful could have me deported. Victoria sat through these testimonies with visible contempt, rolling her eyes at each witness, examining her manicured nails during the most emotional moments, and even checking her watch twice as if calculating how much longer she would have to tolerate listening to the complaints of people she considered beneath her. Judge Judy watched every gesture, every dismissive movement, cataloging Victoria's complete lack of empathy with the clinical precision of someone building an airtight case. Mrs. Ashford, I'm noticing a pattern here. Multiple employees, all claiming abuse and unpaid wages. All of them women of color or immigrants. All of them working-class people trying to support their families. Do you see the pattern I'm seeing? Victoria's response was delivered with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. Your Honor, people in my position require staff who understand excellence and high standards. Sometimes that means being firm with people who aren't accustomed to the level of quality that wealthy households expect. I'm not going to apologize for having standards. Judge Judy's voice rose slightly, the temperature in the courtroom dropping several degrees as her patience finally reached its absolute limit. Firm. You called a 16-year-old girl an animal. You threw food at your chef's head. You demanded 24-hour availability from a single mother while paying poverty wages. That's not firmness, Mrs. Ashford. That's abuse. That's exploitation. That's treating human beings like they're your personal property. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her face flushed with anger at being challenged by someone she clearly viewed as just another employee who needed to be put in her place. How dare you judge me? I pay these people more than they would make anywhere else. They should be grateful for the opportunity to work in my home, to be around successful people, to learn from someone who understands how the world actually works. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my husband is? The courtroom went absolutely nuclear silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Victoria wasn't finished with her spectacular display of entitled fury. She actually snapped her fingers at Judge Judy, the sharp sound cracking through the silence like a whip, a gesture of such profound disrespect that the bailiff immediately stepped forward and several audience members audibly gasped. My husband is Richard Ashford. He's the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a Fortune 500 company. He has more power in his little finger than you'll ever have in your entire career as a television judge. One phone call from him and your life becomes very difficult, so maybe you should think carefully about how you proceed here. Judge Judy stood up from her chair, a rare and terrifying movement that signaled the complete destruction that was about to unfold. Mrs. Ashford, in 25 years of presiding over this courtroom, I have encountered arrogance, entitlement, and cruelty in many forms. But you represent something I find particularly repulsive. You didn't just abuse these women. You stole from them. You exploited their vulnerable positions. You used their immigration status and their financial desperation as weapons to control them. And now you have the audacity to threaten me with your husband's power as if that means anything in my courtroom. Her voice built to a crescendo that filled every corner of the studio. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Mrs. Ashford, and I want you to listen very carefully because your life is about to change dramatically. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Maria Santos. You will pay her $3,200 in unpaid wages immediately. You will pay an additional $10,000 in emotional distress damages for the psychological abuse you inflicted over 14 months. You will pay $5,000 in punitive damages because your behavior was willful, malicious, and designed to exploit someone you viewed as powerless. And you will pay $2,000 to cover her legal expenses and time off work to be here today. Total judgment $20,200, due immediately upon this ruling. Victoria's face cycled through shock, rage, and then pure panic as Judge Judy continued with devastating precision. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation into wage theft, which is a felony in this state carrying up to 3 years in prison. I am forwarding my complete case file, including all witness statements and evidence, to the Department of Labor for civil investigation into your pattern of labor law violations. I am contacting the 16 other employees you've quietly settled with to inform them they can file criminal complaints against you. I am sending everything to your husband's personal attorney with a recommendation that he investigate your use of marital funds to settle these cases without his knowledge. And finally, I am releasing my findings to the media because the public has a right to know about systematic abuse of vulnerable workers. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, mascara streaming down her face in dark rivers, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the reality crashed down that she had just destroyed her entire life on national television. Judge Judy delivered her final statement with cold satisfaction. "Get out of my courtroom, Mrs. Ashford. And when you lose everything, when your husband divorces you and your friends abandon you and your name becomes synonymous with entitled cruelty, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you could have simply paid this woman what you owed her. Instead, you chose arrogance, and arrogance chose to destroy you completely.